Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that opens up horizons in how you see the world. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, February 7th, and welcome to episode number 54, Different Types of Test Optional Colleges. In this week's news, the higher education divide. The haves keep getting richer, other schools not so much. And we'll be in chapter 54 of 171 answers, and we're talking through the different variations of test optional and test flexible colleges. This week's question asks, what is SAP? And Mark concludes this interview with Elaine Griffin Rubin in the final part of 9 different federal loan repayment options.
It's our anniversary. It's our anniversary. It's our anniversary.
Already? Oh my
yes,
God.
see, I broke the rules. Sorry, Kara. Sorry, Joy. I sang after umpteen warnings, but I had to celebrate.
And it wasn't horrible.
Thank you. Thank you. Coming from you.
Right?
It's genuine sincerity. But I know some people are probably thinking, wait a minute, this is like episode 54 plus the jump off. How can it be your anniversary? Well, shout out to Evo, the consultant that we used when we launched, but he told us to start with a couple episodes. So we actually started the first week in February, and it's February 7th. So Anika, what are your highlights of the year? Is it that bad? You can't think of any highlights?
Let's see, episodes 1 through 54.
That's a cop-out.
So many highlights. What about you? What are your highlights?
Well, this is honestly one of the most fulfilling ventures I've ever been a part of. And I think it's because people of all genders, all races, all locations, all incomes can get free quality college information. And my second highlight would be all the emails and all the texts that we get. And I want to read one that came in that I just loved. Shout out to Dr. Janala, who sent this into us recently. Hey, Mark and Anika, I'm loving the podcast more and more. They are so good and informative. I'm actually so excited now to get into my car and drive to and from work. So, hey, if we're able to help you on the work drive with that traffic, hey, that's like pretty fulfilling. But there is one thing about the podcast I don't like. What do you think that is, Anika?
How dare she? I'm just kidding.
What do you think?
What could it be? I have no idea.
It's the thousands and thousands that we came out of pocket to pay for all our expenses it takes to produce a professional podcast. So we don't mind putting in the time, but the money, not so much. So effective today, we are going to give Your College Bound Kid friends and family members a chance to partner with us by supporting us monthly at whatever level you can. Now, if you're hearing this and you're thinking, oh my goodness, they're hitting me up for money, our answer to you is then don't give. What we want is people who don't see it as a burden, but see it as a joy and just want to partner with us at whatever level you can. We will forever be grateful. What do you want to add to that, right, Anika?
That's right. I diddle all of that. And I do say it has been a joy to produce the show.
Even if you can't think of a reason.
All of the thousands of people that are listening. Hey, how about that?
That's good. That's good.
I'll just stop there. I think that's enough.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right. This week's article is found in the Washington Post, and it's entitled The Higher Education Divide. The haves keep getting richer, other schools not so much. This is written by Mr. Jeffrey Selingo. I think we may have had an article or two written by Jeffrey before.
I think this is number 4. He's written.
Okay, I know I knew that name. So the have schools are the selective colleges that Jeffrey is talking about. And these are the schools that accept fewer than 50% of their applicants. And even though they enroll only 20% of the over 17 million undergraduates in the U.S., they account for more than 1/3 of all college applications. And so, he gives these instances where these schools, well, Harvard, of course, and Princeton, they recorded. I think the year before last, they recorded an all-time low of acceptance where they were at like 4.6% and 5.5% respectively. And he cites also Brown University, for instance, who is extending a wait list of over 2,500 applicants in a year. So they're accepting folks. But just imagine how many people that they're putting on their wait list. And he just goes on to cite these institutions that are doing so well in terms of their enrollment or the applications. And then there are the have-nots, the colleges that would love to have just as many on those other schools' waiting lists to have in their admission pool. And so these schools, of course, they accept most of the students who apply, and they often struggle to fill their freshman class. And they oftentimes need to discount their sticker price substantially lower than they normally anticipate. So he just goes on, Mark, about these ideas on how to address these issues and how to, I guess, maybe provide some parity among the admissions process. But he's saying basically admissions, even in the haves and the have-nots, it's not, it's kind of it's tanking, and he's trying to come up with these new ideas to address the issue. So what did you think in any of this?
Well, first of all, I love Jeffrey Selingo. We actually included the book he wrote as one of our recommended resources, and he's just one of the real thought leaders. And he's definitely somebody I'm going to reach out to about interviewing, sometime in the next 12 months. And he's talking about something that's a really important problem in college admissions. A lot of times, Anika, we talk about all these tips. Like right now, we're going through 64 straight chapters about how to get in, and we're given all these tips. And a lot of that is geared more towards selective schools. And that makes a lot of sense because all the research shows, and I think our email correspondence would indicate this as well, that podcast listeners in general are a highly educated, more affluent population. And so a lot of our listening family are striving to get into these more selective schools. So we spend a lot of time talking about these things, right? Because if you're applying to one of these schools, and like you said, he initially defines the haves as schools that admit less than 50%. Then he went on to say there's a super have, he didn't use that word, that accept less than 20%, which, by the way, I don't know if you know this, Anika, but Davidson's in that category of under 20% admission. And then there's the mega have, which I'm making, those are in his terms, but he had gradations from the haves to the have mores to the have even mores, right? Under 50%, under 20, and then under 10%. And basically said for them, the problem is crazy. Like people are banging down the doors to come in. But there's this other group, and here's a quote from the articles from Chronicle of Higher Ed. It says a survey released earlier by the Chronicle of Higher Education found that 44% of public colleges and 52% of private colleges didn't meet their enrollment goals in 2017. The same survey revealed that 55% of private colleges and 52% of public colleges had to discount tuition much more than they had planned. Recently, research came out saying more than half the schools in the country are not filled by May 1st, and the majority of college presidents are worried whether or not they'll be able to be at full enrollment, meet their budgetary goals, and a high percentage are wondering if they're even going to be open in 10 years. So we have some other podcasts coming up. We're going to talk about why are higher ed feeling such a crunch. But most of the schools in the country are feeling major, major, major pressure. They're just trying to pay their bills and survive, and then so how can you have these two extremes? It reminds me of the conversation going on in the country right now, Anika, without getting too political. You got 75,000 people in the country, the top 1/10 of 1% that have as much wealth as the bottom 90. And the top 1% in the country have as much wealth as the bottom 95. So the same thing you see in society, you see in higher ed. And so he's pointing that problem out. And I think we can't say this enough because for all the talk that we do about doing this with your test scores and with your recommendations and with your essays and interviews and all the things we talk about, giving people tips and insights and that extra little nuance to help them with the process, we cannot forget the fact that the majority of schools out there are not selective. The majority of schools out there are struggling, and they're seriously having conversations about closures and mergers. And so, and I don't think we can say that enough because I feel the public, there's so much publicity, Stanford, 5 straight years, they've been the most selective school in the country. Last year, they're 4.6%. I don't even know what their admission rate's going to be this year, but I was at a session with a bunch of leaders meeting with Stanford, and one person spoke up and said, is your goal to get to 1%? Acceptance rate? Is that what you're trying to do? So,
did you say yes? The answer yes?
No, well, they're actually, what I find the most selective schools do is they're trying to really ramp down the stress. But the reality is they have brand name, they have recognition, and the more scarce they become, the more people want them. So it's a never ending cycle. But what he does in the article that I really do like is he says the same thing, that the conversation that's happening in the country about wealth, right? This is not sustainable. We have to do something about this. We can't have large numbers of schools, literally, and we could even get into, which we're not in this discussion, Anika, talking about what these schools that are struggling, what they're paying their professors. It is a pittance, and how they're turning to not having tenured professors and just using adjuncts. And we could go on and on about the layoffs and the departments they're closing. And God forbid we get into how much they're financially gapping families. And you have a family that can only afford $20,000, they're asking you to pay $50,000 because they don't have the money. Like, we could go into all of the things that these financially struggling schools are doing, not just that they're talking about closing and merging just to survive. But what he does is he proposes 3 ideas to fix the problem. Now, the one thing I would say, so I want to commend him for taking a leadership role, being such a thought leader. All of us in higher ed, in leadership roles, we kind of respect Jeffrey Selingo because we know he's thought provocative, and he really leads us to cogitate and think about a lot of important ideas, and that's how you make changes. If I have a criticism of the article, what I will say is some of the ideas that he does postulate, they are really, really impragmatic. They're just not doable.
Well, and he says that, and he says that, and that's yeah. And I didn't totally get why he decided to still put them forward if he's saying that they're darn near impossible to execute.
And in fairness,
but I guess he's trying to give food for thought, and address the need, right?
Yeah. And in fairness to him, these aren't. I made it sound like these are all his ideas. These are not really his ideas, right? What he's done is he's like compiling ideas that have been proposed by others out there. So wanting, do you remember any of the ideas, Anika, that he threw out there?
I know he was saying to some of the selective schools to use a lottery system.
Yeah,
which I almost feel like it is now anyway. Almost.
Yeah.
But so that was, that in itself was not feasible, right?
Yeah.
And then what else did he talk about? He talked about another proposal was to have to do a matching system.
Right.
He rated it like the National Resident Matching Program.
Correct.
And then, let me start with the first one, though, which I should have because I thought was kind of interesting. Is one was to allow groups of colleges that are competing for certain students to share information about the applicants.
Correct.
So I thought that was the most interesting out of all of them. And I understand that at one point that was being done by a certain group of schools, but it was shut down because it was seen as some kind of illegal mannerism, I guess.
Yeah, well, what happened is there was legislation filed, and it was an antitrust legislation was brought against them, and so I actually loved that when that was in place. You had a group of schools called the Overlap Group, and what they used to do is they used to meet and they would agree, look, we don't want this all to come down to muddy, and we're buying kids and bidding against one another. So let's agree to offer similar financial aid packages so family are truly making the decision not based on cost, but based on who they really want to go. Where they really want to go. But then the Justice Department, when they bought that antitrust charge, they actually won the suit, and it caused that to go down. And there was some real criticism when that came out. It's going to be a complete financial free for all after that, and of course it has been. But so I just like the idea of stimulating thought because basically something has to be done. And the very last part of the article says, if we are going to restore trust in higher education, we need to start by rethinking admissions, which is basically the whole point. So why do you think we selected this article, Anika? What do you think we would like that our listeners to take away?
Well, I think it's a matter of, you point out the fact that these schools are so selective that, the kids, because we talked about this before, where the kids are, putting all their hopes and dreams into these, dream schools, and they're crushed when they don't get into them. So I think that's one angle to take, and then the other is that there are just I think there are just a lot of great schools out there that we don't necessarily give a chance. And I know we've talked about so many times is that there's schools that we haven't heard of. We talk about the rankings and how the rankings play a big deal in all of this. So it's just a matter of really understanding what a real quality education is, and understanding that there's a lot more out there to be taken advantage of than what we normally know or know of.
No, your point is well taken. And instead, in other words, I'll put it in dating terms. Instead of like 50 guys asking the homecoming queen to go to the prom, like there's some other beautiful girls in the school, like look around.
Right.
So that's a good point. Another point that is really important is just because we talk so much about tips as to how to get into highly selective schools, I really think we can't come back enough and just talk about that. These schools they are not the norm. If there are 4,000 accredited 2- and 4-year schools in higher ed, you're talking about less than 400 that fit into the highly selective category, and that's using the 50% criteria, not the 20% or the 10% acceptance rate criteria.
Right.
So we're talking about 10% of all of the colleges out there. And that's, like I said, that's not even the ultra selective category. So I think sometimes, students get stressed out and they don't even think they're going to get in a college. Like I cannot tell you, Anika, how many times I work with a student and get into college and like, oh my goodness, at least I'm going to college. Pressure's off. And why? And there's no way in the world they should feel that way when you realize how many students would love to have a good C student.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, friends, we are in our last chapter on test scores, which I'm excited about. So for our first-time listeners, I wrote a book called 171 Answers. That's the name of the book. Subtitle is To the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And the book serves as our textbook for this section of the podcast. We go chapter by chapter through the book and hit on a few points. So this and our episode numbers correspond with the chapter number. So that's, if you ever hear me say like chapter 57, it's because just think of it as episode 57. But this is our last question on test scores in all 171 weeks that it's going to take us to go through this series. And the question we are asking today is, what are the different variations of test optional or test flexible colleges? So last week, we talked about test optional colleges, and we talked about why schools go test optional and why schools don't. And I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that if you never got a chance to hear episode 53. But if you only heard last week's episode, you probably got the sense that you're either test optional or you're not. And you probably didn't understand the breadth and the range and the scope of different types of test optional schools or test flexible. So with that, Anika, what were your thoughts on this chapter? You want to give us a summary of what some of these different variations of being test optional or test flexible are?
Well, I don't know about a summary, but I do want to say when I first heard about the whole test optional movement, I was like, wait, what? We don't have to take these tests, and there are over 900 schools out there. We don't have to be bothered with all this crap. But I also came to a realization that NAIA's list doesn't include any of those test optional opportunities.
You got all excited, and then it was like a big giant balloon, and then it just went pop.
Right. Come through, John. Come through, Mr. Fifth grader.
You got 8 years for more schools to go test optional.
Right. Exactly. So, but the thing is that, but it is nice to know that, first of all, test optional, meaning that number one, that you're not admitted based on your test scores. However, the scores are used for certain cases, such as, for example, they could be used just simply for placement of the student and their academic advising, or
right. So that would be one. That would be one variation. So they're not used for admission. They're not used to determine if you get in, but they are used to determine whether you take a 201 or a 101 class. That would be like one version, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And then certain programs, like I'm sure, if you want to get into engineering college versus education college, I'm sure, it could be applied then. And this was a bummer though, that, sometimes it's just applied to the out-of-state students where they're the ones that require the SAT test.
And sometimes for international, sometimes it's just for international students too. It's okay for domestic, but not for international.
Now, what I wasn't so up to speed on was the test flexible, which is slightly different from what I understand. And that is that it's not necessarily that your
Can I stop
SAT
you for one
score is going to be
second? Can I
used.
stop? Can I stop you
Yeah.
for 1 second?
Yeah.
So one other
Mm-hmm.
variation that you'll see of test optional is that if you have a certain GPA, then you don't have to submit your score. So that's another one. So like if you have like if you have a 3.5 or a 3.0, then we don't need to see your score. So that just okay. All right, go to test flexible.
Okay, so test flexible is that, okay, we don't need your SAT test, but maybe you have an AP score, test exam score that we want to use, or even an SAT subject test, and not the actual, the traditional full exam. So that that was new. So I thought that was great.
Well, good. I'm glad you learned something, because that's good. Because you're getting you're getting pretty up to speed on this stuff here, Miss Anika Madden, and you're ready. You're getting through undergrad. We're going into this is getting into grad level stuff. So yeah. So basically, with test flexible, you have to submit some test scores, but not necessarily an SAT or ACT. And when it comes to test flexible scores, you really need to read the policy, because just because a school's test flexible, it doesn't mean, oh, I'll submit whatever I want. We did Iowa Test of Basic Skills in iSchool. We did Terra Novas. We did map tests. That's what I'll send them, or some statewide tests that you have. No, you don't get to dictate to them what you submit. Even that it's test flexible, the college itself will determine what your options are, and it will be clearly elucidated. And I want to read to you an example of a test flexible college. And this is from Colby College. And this is something I have reading right from my book. I included this in the chapter. So this is what Colby College says about their test flexible policy in 2018. Notice how user-friendly their appeal is to allow students to showcase their strengths. So here's what it says. You will need to provide us with standardized test results for either the SAT. So notice they don't say you can't do the SAT. It's just one of the ones in the list. Either the SAT, the ACT, or 2 SAT subject tests. We use these scores as part of our holistic application review. You may self-report your scores when applying to Colby, either by reporting them on your application to Colby or by sending a PDF copy of your score report via email. Official scores will be required only for students choosing to enroll at Colby. We believe in transparency in the admission process, so we encourage you to send off your standardized test scores. We will only consider the scores that you put in the most competitive position in our applicant pool. So we don't want to get too confused, Anika, but we did an episode, it was a long time ago. I know it was like over 6 months ago about school self-reporting scores. Do you remember that? We talked about how schools.
That wasn't that long ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, so they're combining self-reporting, which is designed to save students money, and not have to pay to have your score sent, with a test flexible position. And once again, in their case, they're giving you the choice of 2 subject tests, the 1-hour content test we talked about, an SAT or an ACT. Other policies will include AP, as Anika mentioned earlier. So it's just nice to know. And Anika, do you remember the best resource for learning if a school is test optional, test flexible? If it's test optional, test flexible, what variation it is?
I'm going to go with the college's website.
So the college's website is always the best. That's always safe, right? But let's say you want to really quickly look up 10 schools. You don't want to flip to 10 websites. Fairtest.org. So that's what they do. Fairtest.org. They're all about trying to move away from standardized test scores. They really are good at being current. And Anika, do you know that over 1,000 schools are now test optional or test flexible? And do you know 100 more colleges went test optional or test flexible in the last 12 months? And one of those test optional colleges is Colby College. Now, I just read their test flexible policy, but that was their 2017 policy. In late 2018, a few months after the University of Chicago went test optional, Colby switched from being test flexible to going test optional, joining their local competitors Bates and Bowdoin in being a test optional college. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Mark, our question is from an anonymous listener out in Nevada. And the question asks, what is SAP? And that's SAP as in Paul. What is that, Mark? Because I have no idea.
Well, I'll tell you something. Growing up in Canada, I remember as a school kid, we used to go out and have to get maple syrup from the trees with this little jar, and they used to call it sap. They were getting sap, and I remember that as a kid. And so SAP is not maple syrup. It is an acronym.
We figured that.
Oh yeah, you turn it for college admission podcast and you start talking about some syrup. We'd lose all our listeners quick. So it is an acronym. It is an acronym, and it stands for Satisfactory Academic Progress. That's what SAP stands for. It's actually very important. So we're going to do a deep dive into this. So let's talk about this, Anika. The federal government gives away over $150 billion with a B dollars in financial aid. When you look at Pell Grant, FSCOG, and the federal government's loan programs, that's a lot of money, right? $150 billion. So when we say the federal government, who's paying for that money?
Us, the people.
Us, the people. So we're paying for the money with our taxes. So here's the question. Let's just get right down to the nub. Would you want your tax dollars to go to a student with a 1.2 GPA? Would you want your tax dollars to go to a student that's an undergraduate and they're in their 10th or 12th year? Would you want your tax dollars to go to a student that more than half the classes they take, they don't complete? The answer for most people is no. I'm okay with you taking my tax dollars to help out in education, but I want to know that there's some semblance of seriousness that is being taken by this venture on the part of the students who are recipients of the dough. And that's what SAP stands for. So SAP is an acronym for Satisfactory Academic Progress, and it doesn't have anything to do with getting aid. You will get federal financial aid if you complete the FAFSA. You'll get need-based if you qualify and if the school has the resources, and you'll get loans just by completing it as long as, you fulfill some basic requirements. It's like being a U.S. citizen, a few other things. We talked about that before. Satisfactory academic progress, which is just a mouthful, right? Who wants to look how many syllables? Satisfactory. That word's 5 syllables. Academic for progress 11. So you don't want to keep saying 11-syllable word, 11-syllable phrase. So you just call it SAP all the time because he wants to do. It's like, I can't even say her name, Alexandra Costa Cortez. But I just can't say AOC.
You better not talk about her, Mark. You're gonna get jumped.
It's just too long. Her name is too long. She even changed her Twitter handle to AOC, which is good. AOC is like SAP. Thank you for making it easy for me. So SAP. And so, so it's nothing to do with getting aid. That's the FAFSA. Complete the FAFSA. And if you qualify for need-based financial aid, you'll get it. If you need low-interest loans, you'll get it. But SAP has everything in the world to do with keeping your aid, keeping it. So there was a reason why I laid out 3 scenarios, Anika, and I said, what if it was a 1.2? Would you want to fund that person? What if this person is taking 10 years? Would you want to fund them? What if they don't complete most of the courses they try, or a large percentage that they try? Would you want to fund them? The reason I said it that way is because every school has their own SAP policy, but every SAP policy will always be comprised of 3 things. There will be a requisite GPA. There will be a percentage of credits that a student has to successfully complete, which is oftentimes called PACE, or completion rate, or sometimes pace of progression. So, for example, if you've attempted 100 credit hours, you have to have completed a certain percentage to meet the PACE requirements. What you'll see very, very commonly there is 67% is very common. 2/3 is very common. 70% you'll see sometimes. Those are the most common ones I see. And grade point average, look, they're not trying to be brutal and boot you out because, you're just not an amazing student. a very common GPA is a 2.0. It's not the only one. You'll see different GPAs. You'll see different GPAs that will vary for grad schools, for law schools, even based on major. So this stuff can get complicated. And then the third, so the first part is a GPA requirement. The second part is what we call a pace or completion percentage rate or pace of progression, meaning that you are completing most of the classes you attempt. And then the last thing is what's referred to as maximum time frame. That refers to students that fail to make satisfactory academic progress over a period of time. That means you can't be in school forever. And so what's very common when it comes to pace of completion is 150% of the time allotted. So if it's 120 credit hours to graduate, then 180 hours attempted for a semester program, or 150% of the amount necessary to graduate. That's very, very common as far as the pace. I'm going to take a breath and see what you're thinking, because I know this whole thing is new to you.
No,
and it's new to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I would say less than 5% of students looking at college know what SAP is.
And I just wonder, I mean, when is that communicated? Is that during the application process for federal aid, or I mean, who lets the kids know about that? And who monitors it? What are the milestones? Like, oh, you're not going fast enough.
Okay.
Where does that come from?
Okay. So Anika, you ask really good questions. You ask questions that most parents would ask. I mean that. So that's good. I'm kind of glad that you weren't familiar with it, because you're asking the questions that most people ask. So you hit one of my pet peeves. The communication is poor. It is. Like, I do not hear SAP communicated like it should be. If you read all the literature that they send you, you will see it in there. It's certainly posted on schools' websites. It is there. And a lot of times it's in your financial portal under the financial aid, caption there. You'll see it there. And like I said, on the websites. Do you get it if you go to orientation? You absolutely should. Do you get it everywhere? I can't say that. I absolutely can't say you get it, because you'll talk to a lot of college students that haven't even heard of SAP. So I do feel that schools do a poor job of communicating it before students get into college. But here's what I will say, that the financial aid office monitors it, Anika. And they do a good job of warning you when you're getting close to, not meeting SAP. Now there's different policies on that. Some schools are good at giving you a warning and then letting you know that I'm sorry, you're not in compliance. I feel schools do a good job at that. What's very common is, one, they'll put it in your portal, but they'll also send you an email. That's very common. See, Jalen's a good student. If he would have been a really bad student, you would know about this. Right. By the way, do you know that 10% of students in college have under a 2.0?
No, 10%. I did not know that.
Pretty high. So what that means is that a lot of students are not meeting SAP. You have to meet it. It's a standard. It's a standard you have to meet, satisfactory academic progress. And what do you think happens if you don't meet it, Anika?
I'm assuming you get in the caboot.
You get no more money. You can stay in, but you're not getting money. As long, you lose your, because remember, this is federal.
Right.
This is federal money.
Yeah.
This is federal money, right? So there's, let me say a few more things about SAP. And then, with your permission, Anika, I have a lot more I want to say about this, but I don't want this to be a 20-minute segment. Would you be okay if we picked up part 2 on this next week? It would mean that we'll have to push our bonus questions back 1 week that we announced. But I got a lot I want to say, and I think people will be interested in it, but I don't want to spend 30 minutes just on SAP.
But it's pretty darn relevant.
Let me say a few more things and we can be out. Yeah. No, it's very important. So one of the things I want to say about SAP that's really important is, if you're not sure if dropping a course is going to impact SAP, you need to speak to your financial aid counselor. It's really important that you do that. Because remember when I was talking about pace of completion, where they look at the percentage of courses that you have attempted versus what you complete? So one of the things that can count against you is when you drop out of a class and you withdraw. That can count against your pace of completion. It's not just courses that you failed. Obviously, a failure, everybody knows that would count, right? But there's so many other things that can count, like incompletes and all kinds of things, which I'm going to get more into that next week, all the things that can count against you at failure to fulfill the pace of completion. It's basically a formula that looks at, it's a ratio, it's an equation. The hours attempted versus the hours completed. One of the things I'll say just briefly, we'll touch on this next week as well. There's an appeals process, Anika. There is an appeals process. So let's say you get a warning. Let's say you lose SAP. You can appeal. And some of the things that can get you clemency in an appeal could be things like a severe injury, a severe illness, or a family death. So those are some of the things. And so, but it's monitored by the financial aid office. And I do want to leave with, besides students learning about SAP right now, what's one takeaway that we can share with students or families about this that you think?
My takeaway is always awareness, but I'm going to let you drill it on out.
You don't have to be so general. Awareness. You're going to the answer for every question. Awareness.
Is that not,
awareness? Mark, go to the website. Awareness. Go to the website.
Mark, education. Awareness and education.
It is. You're right. Empowerment. Knowledge is power. Empowerment. This is one other thing. Awareness is true, and that's why we are attempting to, explicate this so people understand what this is all about. But here's another thing I want to say. Build a relationship with the financial aid officer if you're getting financial aid. They can be your biggest advocate and friend. Get to know somebody in that office, please, if you're getting financial aid. It will really make your life easy. I want to close with this. I don't want to get too specific because we have to really respect confidentiality. But there is a student that I worked with 4 or so years ago that, Anika, this person, and they were really struggling about whether or not they were going to be able to stay in their school for financial reasons. And I thought they were going to have to leave at some point. And it turns out they graduated. So I was having a conversation and I was like, what happened? And they built such a good relationship with the financial aid officer that financial aid officer started telling them about all kinds of money and this department scholarship. And here's this scholarship and here's this opportunity. And sure enough, they had the funds to make it to the finish line.
Love it. We would like to thank all of our amazing listeners for your comments, for sharing your stories, and for the tremendous feedback on how our episodes have impacted your lives. We are so humbled by you, and we are 100% committed to helping fill the void in education around the college admissions process. So now, to help offset some of the considerable production costs for the show, we are asking for your financial support.
We are very excited to introduce 2 very nominal levels of support that will allow us to remain commercial free and to meet the various expenses that it takes to produce this show. You can show your support by investing in either of our Sustainer gift level, which is only $5 per month, or the Enhancer gift level, which is only $10 a month. And if you would like to give a larger monthly gift or a one-time gift, you can absolutely do that as well.
So at our $5 a month Sustainer gift level, this is what you're going to get. We're going to recognize you for your support on our website, and you'll receive an invitation to participate in a private group video college presentation that will happen in the month of January. And we're going to mail you 2 beautiful Your College Bound Kid notebooks, one for you and one for your student. And for our $10 a month Enhancer gift level supporters, you're going to get all of that at the Sustainer plan level, in addition to a 30-minute private one-on-one video college session with Mark on any admissions topic that you would like to cover. And also an amazing opportunity for a 100-word shout out on the show to recognize the hard work of your student.
It's so easy to support the show. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and select donate from our website menu. Again, we thank you so much for your support, and we deeply appreciate any and all gifts that will allow us to keep going commercial free.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, friends, if you've heard the first 2 parts of my interview with Elaine Griffin Rubin, then you know she is encyclopedic in her knowledge. And so in the final episode, as we talk about 9 different repayment options for federal loans, Elaine will talk about pay-as-you-earn option, revised pay-as-you-earn option, which loans qualify for interest subsidies, Are these loans eligible for public service loan forgiveness? And if so, what are the terms? And do any of the loans qualify for interest subsidies? She'll also talk about your tax filing status and how much you will be asked to pay. Next, Elaine transitions to what is the income sensitive repayment plan and why do so few people use the income sensitive repayment plan. Next, she'll share what are some common mistakes that Elaine sees students make when it comes to selecting one of the 9 repayment plans. And then she'll share 3 suggestions to help you manage your loans. There's a reason why we had Elaine Griffin Rubin back. She was with us about 6 months ago. It's because of her passion for the work and because of her knowledge. So I hope you guys listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
So let's talk about the pay-as-you-earn repayment plan. Describe this one for us, and who's a good prospect for taking advantage of this plan, in your opinion?
So this one's good if you're eligible for it. This one's pretty restrictive on who is eligible to repay under this plan. That's because you need to be a new borrower as of October 1st, 2007, and received a disbursement of a direct loan on or after October 1st, 2011. I don't mean to giggle or anything in the background, but it's very specific. So if you do not know if you meet that criteria, use some of those resources we just talked about to see if you qualify. Essentially, though, however, this plan is very similar to the new IBR plan, which has got a different qualification. So maybe if you don't fit into this bucket, maybe you fit into the bucket of the new IBR, but there will be lots of people out there who would not be able to use this plan as well as the new IBR plan. But just, try, see if you can find a way to qualify for it if you do meet these criteria.
So what about the revised pay-as-you-earn plan? That's not the same as the new IBR, right? That's another different plan. Am I correct about that?
That's another one. So
you can't make this stuff up, right?
I know. And the acronyms are helpful to kind of separate them so you don't say the words out loud sometimes because they all sound so similar. So pay as you earn, the acronyms PAYE, so it's a pay plan, and then repay for revised pay as you earn. That's a way to, I think it's a little easier to keep them straight with the acronyms because then you're not thinking too much about what they mean. And Mark, I think I shared this with you. I am bilingual and I've helped Spanish speakers kind of work through some of this as well. And the interesting part of translating some of this stuff is it all means the same thing. Income-based, income contingent, income sensitive is another one. So, some of these words literally translate to the same thing. So you have to find a way to keep them separate in your mind. And sometimes the acronyms do make it easier. One of the only times I think acronyms make life easier.
Yeah.
So pay as you earn. I guess I can quickly go over this one a little bit.
Yeah.
But 10% of your discretionary income, it will never be more than your 10-year repayment amount, and you do need to qualify for this one. So that standard repayment amount has to be greater than 10% of your discretionary income. Your spouse's income or loan debt will be considered if you file a joint tax return. And after 20 years of repayment, any remaining loan debt will be forgiven. And there is that 3-year 100% subsidy on subsidized loans for any time that your monthly, well, not any time, just for those 3 years, but when your monthly payment isn't covering the amount of interest that has accrued there. So I went through that quickly, but it is very similar to the new IBR plan. It's mainly the qualifications to get into the plan, which are the big difference here.
Great. And once again, remember, you can talk to your loan servicer and go over different options and punch the numbers in. And you did mention our 8th and final plan, because I don't think our listeners could take any more. I don't know if I could take a 9th plan. So if I couldn't take it, you can, because you deal with this every day, all the time. But income sensitive, you hinted it, you put it out there so they would be ready for it. Explain that one to us, please.
Well, there is 9 actually, because we also have repay to go over.
Oh, oh, of course.
So, should we go back to repay though? Because ISRs.
Yeah. Why don't you touch on repay and then cover income sensitive?
Okay. So revised pay as you earn, repay, the acronym there that we have. This one is different, but also has similarities. I feel like I'm on repeat almost. But this one's more of like a combo of all the ones we've seen before. So you don't need to qualify for this one. And your payments are set to 10% of your discretionary income. But because you don't need to qualify, there's no cap on how high that payment can go. So as your income increases, so does your payments. And you can repay your direct loans under this plan, except for Parent Plus loans, and you can't use that loophole like we did for the ICR plan. Forgiveness for this plan is going to be a little bit different. If you only took out loans for undergraduate study, then after 20 years of repayments, the remaining balance will be forgiven. If you took out loans for undergraduate and maybe a graduate professional or just graduate professional studies, it will take 25 years of repayments and then repayment. And after that, if there's anything left over, that will be forgiven. If you're married in this case, it doesn't really matter if you filed your taxes jointly or separate. Both income and both loan debts will be considered here. And the interest subsidy is actually probably the biggest difference here for this plan. So essentially, if you're not covering your accrued interest every month with your monthly payment, for 3 years, 100% of your subsidized loan interest that's not covered will be taken care of with an interest subsidy, and 50% from that point on. So you kind of always have a percentage covered there for that subsidized loan. It's either 100 or 50%. And for your non-subsidized loans, those unsubsidized loans, it'll be a 50% interest subsidy. So that only is towards any interest that has accrued that month that has not been covered by your monthly payment. Because the one thing here, the big kicker here, is that your minimum payment for a lot of these plans can go down to zero. Income contingent, I believe, it only goes down to $5 a month. But there is a big help with that interest subsidy. Now, the one thing I'll note here, a lot of people think, great benefit, I'll make 20 years, 25 years of payments, whatever it is, and everything will be forgiven. I don't want to set a false expectation out there that there will be something to forgive. The idea behind these plans is over time, you have an income, maybe a modest income starting out, and depending on your loan debt and how that plays out, you might have very little to almost nothing to forgive at the end. 20 to 25 years is a long time. So keep that in mind. And there's also some other things that come with that forgiveness. As of right now, if you do have any forgiveness from these plans, it's not, you will have to pay taxes on it. So it will be taxable income. Now that could change. That's up to the powers that be. But right now, that's kind of how it works. So it's not necessarily this, magic answer all the time. A lot of people will experience paying their loans off to 20 to 25 years. And if you do have anything left to forgive at that point, keep in mind, you could be taxed on. So as of right now, all subject to change. We're not going to get into another topic of the policy world, but that's kind of where it lies right now.
Great.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 54 is the book, How to Become a Straight A Student by Cal Newport. Now, this was a book that one of my students told me helped her tremendously, so I decided to read it, and I really liked a lot of what it had to say. The book talks about working smarter versus working harder. It talks about tips that you can use to be more organized and have better time management and how to work more efficiently. It talks about how to combat procrastination. It talks about the value of a focused study approach in short bursts and the value of study in isolation. It talks about research on how proper eating and drinking can impact your grades. And it teaches you how to do effective note taking, how to skim effectively, how to plan and proofread, and how to write great essays. The book is about developing sound habits, and it's an outstanding book to read before you go off to college. We'll now return to the final part of my interview with Elaine Griffin Rubin of Edvisors. Now we're on our ninth and final one. Is that correct? Or did income sensitive?
Yes.
Okay, so this is
yes.
it. Income sensitive. Break it down for us. 60 seconds.
All right. So this plan is not for everyone. This plan is only eligible to loans in the Federal Family Education Loan Program, known as the FFEL program. That loan program hasn't made new loans since 2010. So not everyone's going to be eligible for this. And that also means that you haven't consolidated out of the FFEL program to take advantage of other things like PSLF, some military benefits, that sort of thing. So this plan, it's used. I'm not going to say it's not used. It's kind of a hard blanket statement to use, but it's probably the least used type of plan because it's only for a limited amount of borrowers, and these borrowers tend to be older borrowers in the portfolio. Not older in the way that they're of age, but more like they've had loans for quite a bit of time because we haven't made loans in this program for a while. So essentially the basics, if you want to repay based on your income and you have FFEL loans, this would be a great option. Chances are you've been in repayment for a while. So if you're not already in it, I would maybe try to figure out if there's another way around this because you've been in repayment for a while. But you will have to, your loan essentially will have to be repaid within 15 years. And your lender will help you calculate this payment. So there's not too much I could explain on it. You probably have to work with your lender and see what your payments will be.
Well, that's probably a lot easier for people anyway. So that's probably good. So
yes.
A couple quick questions. What are some common mistakes you see, students or parents or graduates make when it comes to choosing a plan?
Picking the lowest monthly payment. Just because it sounds better and they feel like they'll have some extra spending money every month and like maybe live a different type of lifestyle. This shouldn't always be the way to kind of make the decision because these have long-term consequences. If you're extending your repayment term, if you're not paying them the most you can every month, then you're going to pay more overall in the end. But that's the one I would not just... If you're not looking for anything else like public service loan forgiveness or anything else there, and you can afford a standard repayment plan, I wouldn't just choose the lowest amount per month unless I really needed it. If I needed it to live and survive, and we talked about like if you have a $1,400 per month payment, that can be really unmanageable, especially when you're first starting out. The other thing I would say is people looking into using an extended repayment instead of looking at their IDR options, their income-driven repayment plan options. Because maybe it seems easier, maybe they're confused by the IDR plans and they don't want to get into that world. But there are some interest subsidies on these IDR plans to help you out. If you happen to be in public service, you could qualify for forgiveness after 10 years. Like there's a lot of other benefits that these IDR plans have. And I wouldn't just assume that you don't qualify or doesn't make sense. I would run some numbers, talk to your loan servicer, and make the best decision for you and put some time into it. But just don't sign up and say, okay, I'm good. Put some time, some research, and figure out the best route for you to go.
So like a lot of things in life, listeners, the easy way out is not always the best way. Yeah. And what
yes.
and what is there anything else that you would like to share at all about repaying student loans that we didn't cover by kind of walking through these plans?
So I would say there's probably about 3 things that are always advice that I like to give people who come to me for help. Keep track of your loans. especially if you're in those plans that require low maintenance. Keep an eye on them. Know what's going on with them. Check in every once in a while. You might have all those automatic payments going through, which, by the way, could give you a little bit of a break on interest, that sort of thing. So you're forgetting about them. Don't forget about them. Make sure you know what's going on with them. Make sure everything's working out well and in your favor. And also, make sure you're making your monthly payments on time. I know that sounds like silly as advice, but make sure you're doing it. And if you're having trouble at all, if you're having issues making your payments, do not go into hiding. Do not turn off your phone. Do not ignore calls. Call your loan servicer, because if you're having trouble meeting your payment amount, there could be other things going on. Maybe you had a reduction in income in your household, and now you would qualify for an income-driven repayment plan that will help your situation. Just do not go into hiding. We talked about postponing loan payments. Definitely a benefit out there if you need it. We caution always to only use those types of things if you need it, but they're there for a reason to help protect you. And the other piece of advice I will always say is when you can, especially if you're not working towards a public service loan forgiveness or anything like that, and you're on like a 10-year standard repayment amount and you're trying to work to pay those loans off, maybe throw a little extra in every month. 5, 10, 20, 100, as much as you can. Get those loans paid off. Get that cloud of loans following you around away from your head. Get it to disappear as fast as you can. If you got some extra income and everything's going great in your life, why not get rid of those a little bit faster? It'll save you money overall, and it'll really help you out.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So as we wind down now, Elaine, this has really been fantastic. The information you've shared is invaluable. You've told us where we can go and get additional information. But I want you to just tell us a little bit more about your website. Talk to us a little bit more about your newsletter, your blog, and how people can fully take advantage of what Edvisors has to offer.
So Edvisors.com, we try to help people throughout the process. We have a lot of information, especially to get you started and into getting into school, planning and paying for college. But we do go all the way through repayment. On our site, like I've said a few times, we want to make sure we have the best information. We try to write blogs that are current to the times. But we have the ability for you to chat and ask questions. We've got a great team here ready to help you in real time to give you some general information about how this whole process works for any steps that you happen to be in. And we also have the Ask the Edvisor tool where you can submit a question online, and most of the time I will be answering those questions directly. So you can get some direct advice from me and maybe some others here, because sometimes I do like to have some time off every once in a while. But I try to answer as many of those personally as I can. Other great things we have on our site, we have the 2018 Student Loan Handbook, touches a little bit more on the front end and getting the basics of the whole financial aid process and understanding interest and disbursements and all that kind of great information. And we also have the newsletter I know you've mentioned. So if you go to Edvisors.com, you can scroll down to the bottom and enter your email, and then we'll put you on our list to send you out an email. And these emails, we try to put current information on all aspects of college life, give you some scholar tips, some resources, and like things to think about and use. So it's a great resource. I think I receive it myself, even though I helped create it, just to see the types of content. We get a lot of great feedback from how time relevant the content is that's going out every month.
And one thing listeners need to know about all of this information at Edvisors, it's all free. So there's not a charge for this information. So just wanted to thank you so much, not just for coming on in September, but coming back again and sharing all this invaluable information with our listeners. And we wish you nothing but the best in your future, Elaine.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been great, and I'm more than happy to come back in the future.
Thank you. I'll listen to what questions come in from our listeners via email, and don't be surprised if I take you up on that.
No problem at all.
Next week in the news, parenting the college admission applicant as an admission dean. This is coming from Mr. Brennan Bernard, and we'll be in chapter 55 of 171 answers. And we're talking about the 14 different ways that students can apply to college. And we're going to continue with our listeners' question on satisfactory academic progress. And Mark is going to share 13 questions that you want to have answered when looking at your school's SAP policies. And Mark interviews Dr. David Williams. So you want to be a doctor or a nurse? What you need to know.
Anika, you know what? After this first year, I realized I've learned so much from you, because in the past, I would have just gone through all 13 of these in the last episode that we just did. And then when we got off air and our listeners weren't listening, you'd have been like, Mark, that's too much information. My head is spinning. You can't give people that much information in one podcast.
You are doing much better with your information overload. Yes.
You're helping me with that. You're helping me. So this time I just noticed that I just caught it mid-tier. I caught it. I'm like, you know what? Let's just stop right now. But I thank you for that. I mean that. So we learn from each other.
We're all here to help you, Mark. The real purpose of 171 answers.
Have a good weekend. Avoid the snow or cold weather that countries get.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.